We don't start right on the moment either here. Not in Seattle.
No, well, in Virginia, people do.
I've seen some, but then all these people keep coming in. I thought, let them kind of make sure they get the right thing and it's all looking okay. And not that the introduction is anything great to hear. I mean,
Fowzia, are we pronouncing your name correctly?
Yeah, Fowzia. That's right.
Saying Fowzia.
I've had that over the years too. I've heard it all. Someone put an L in my name recently, Fowzia or Flozia or something. It's like, don't worry about it. I don't take it personally. But it's Fowzia. In Farsi, it's Fowzia, with the accent on the last syllable. But yeah, Fowzia.
It took me about 20 years of teaching before I spelled my name. What is it called? I put my name up and I told them how to say it.
Phonetically?
Thank you. It's 8 o'clock here and obviously my brain's offline already. Yeah, it took me 20 years to figure that out. Everyone always said my name wrong and I was like, oh, spell it phonetically. So funny.
Well, if you three are ready, Karen's giving me the word that we can begin, as probably people will keep coming in, and not only the ones here on Zoom, but also, we'll say Will Evans is here, so I will say a particular welcome to him, and Will Evans, who published the book we are about to hear from. So to everyone who is here with us from the various places and days that you are in, and I say that because I know many will be watching this later from people we've heard from who are in other parts of the world. We are delighted you're joining us for this program we have been waiting to do for a long time. I mean, at least a year and 8 months, 6 months. And that is to have Fowzia Karimi with us for this book that came out in April of 2020. A book I've probably talked about more than any other book in the last 18 months, Above Us the Milky Way. Before I totally leap to that, I and my colleague Karen are here from Elliott Bay Book Company, which is on Ducornet land in the city of Seattle, and we're a bookstore there in this part of North America. And this program, though, that we are delighted and honored to be doing with Fowzia, and who will be joining conversation by two other esteemed and marvelous writers and spirits, Rikki Ducornet, who is with us up in Port Townsend, and Micheline Aharonian Marcom, who is with us in Virginia. And I'll say a little about some of the loops of connection among them, because they are part of what is animating this program. But Fowzia is here with this book, which came into our hands before it was published late in 2019, when the world was not the world we've been known the last 18 months, 20 months now. And this book arrived in a package from the publisher Deep Vellum, which is a wonderful press in Texas, and a press that mostly publishes translations. And there's a whole other story about why I would, which has to do with having heard the words Milky Way in another context, but it made me open this book, an advanced copy, and Fowzia knows this story, but we're not here to hear me. And this book, clearly just to open it, and this is even the advanced copy, the art, the text, what's going on, you'll hear about that, how that came to be, and what those stories that unfold in this book are. But it was a book that kind of just knocked me over, and I think it's knocked over many people in the way of in the best way of having language and what you're holding in your hand and what's before your eyes actually change what's going on in yourself and in your being. Fowzia is a writer and an artist, and some of us first were aware of her work from one of Micheline's earlier, actually this novel just before the one that just came out, The Brick House, because this was Fowzia's first work like this in connection with a novel or another piece of writing. In this book, it's her writing and her artwork, and I could say a lot more, but I'm not going to, because she's here, and two others who can say the perceptive and brilliant things you will hear are here also. But Fowzia's here with us from Texas, where it's 7 p.m. And Micheline's with us from Virginia, where it's 8 p.m. And as I say, Rikki's up in Port Townsend. So tonight you'll hear Fowzia talk about this book and the timeliness. This is a book that you don't have to read too far. I mean, if you know some history, you can figure out when this book is set, what places are involved, and then what happens to the people who are in it. But I will say so that time, the once upon a time aspect of it, which reaches even farther back in time as a sense of story, also has a great imminence and urgency to what's going on now in the world, particularly relative to Afghanistan and people there. So Fowzia will show us some of the book and talk about the book and read from the book, and then we'll be joined in conversation by Rikki and Micheline. Rikki herself is an author of extraordinary, deeply brilliant, imaginative works of fiction, most recently the novel Trafik, which she read from here a few months ago, which just came out this year, as well as essays, that most recently the brilliant book, The Deep Zoo, poetry, and she also, like Fowzia, is an extraordinary artist. And Micheline Marcom, who we first knew, as Micheline reminded me, 21 years ago when she came to Seattle for the first of her works of fiction, which was a trilogy about the Armenian genocide and of peoples forced to flee. That novel, Three Apples Fell from Heaven. She read with us earlier this year for her newest novel, The New American, and is presently teaching at the University of Virginia in Charlottesville. So you will hear Fowzia, you'll hear Rikki and Micheline in conversation with Fowzia. We hope you'll put questions in the chat, which Micheline will probably be the one to give to Fowzia or to Rikki or herself, and I will come in at the end. And we do certainly have above us the Milky Way and Rikki's and Micheline's books at Elliott Bay. Karen will also be putting in the chat some organizations related to Afghan relief that Fowzia has suggested contributions for and recommended as being good and doing the necessary and helpful work that's needed doing. Because that, even though we're in a very much this is an artistic and profoundly artistically beautiful work, it is also a reminder of the world we're living in right now. So on that note, to say again for everyone at Elliott Bay, and to say the book you're about to hear from is a reason why some of us do what we do. Please join in welcoming Fowzia Karimi, Rikki Ducornet Micheline Marcom, above us, the Milky Way.
Thank you so much, Rick and Karen from Elliott Bay Book Company. It's incredible to be here, something that we've wanted to do for quite a while, and one thing or another has gotten in the way, but it's just such a joy to be here tonight with Elliott Bay, with Micheline and Rikki, two of my favorite people and two of my favorite writers. I'm just really, really happy to be here with all of you. I'm going to start with some images, sharing images from the book. So let me just bring those up. So I have such a great love for books, for their content, as well as their form, their structure, the thing that they are in the hand. The book is my favorite thing in the world, and has seen me through a lot my whole life. So this book, I mean, it was created to be the full thing, images, the body of it, the content. And I thought it would be appropriate to share what it actually looks like for those of you who haven't seen it. So this here is the outside of the book, the cover obviously, and it shows us, Earthlings, with our sun and moon swimming in the sea of stars in our galaxy. Here's the back cover of the book, the Milky Way. Really, this is a love letter to the cosmos, to our galaxy, the Milky Way. This here is the very front of the book, the inside, the end papers. So again, you have the Milky Way, an arm of the Milky Way riding from top left to bottom right. There's this thing about spiral galaxies, this power and beauty that they have that's just so hypnotic, and also just this beautiful vehicle for movement, for emotion, for everything that is human. This image of the spiral, and you find it throughout the book, both in the content and also visually. Here, this is the end of the prologue. The whirl that is the family, this family of 7 who've immigrated to the United States, to Southern California from Afghanistan in 1980. This is at the beginning of the war with the Soviets. So this whirl, this spiral begins the book and comes up again and again. The book is also a letter of love to the alphabet, to this very basic thing that we come upon it as children. And I remember coming to this country at age 7, having learned the alphabet in Afghanistan and then learning it again here, and falling in love with it, with books. So again, yeah, a letter of love to the alphabet, which in the book plays a really important role. It's very much the backbone of the book, which you can see here in the table of contents. So the book is made up of several hundred short pieces, or actually pieces of varying length, from a couple of lines all the way to 5-6 pages. And each letter of the alphabet introduces a new section of the book. Here is the letter C, and each letter has a piece that goes with it, and also has an accompanying image. The images are either childhood photographs from Afghanistan and from Southern California. And this one is C for color. It's a photograph of my mother and oldest sister in the springtime in Afghanistan. Everybody would go out to the hills to picnic because the hills were just covered with these beautiful, vibrant red poppies. And I've seen it. It's still celebrated. It's still done in Afghanistan and Uzbekistan. A lot of the images, the paintings, are very much inspired by illuminated manuscripts, both Eastern and Western manuscripts, both religious and scientific. So the paintings that I did find their inspiration there. This here is my mother's eyes. She was a big lover of cinema as a child and went regularly, specifically Hindi films, but she watched other foreign films that came into the country as well. So the images can, as in this last, excuse me, as in this, on this page, they can either just sit up against the text or actually walk across it. I'll be reading this piece, The Immigrants, in a little bit. Here very specifically is Hellmouth. It's, you will see it in old illuminated Bibles, medieval Bibles. And in those texts, you have Hellmouth, which is an opening to the bowels of hell. And often you will have demons that are coming out of the mouth and drawing sinners back in. In my book, Hellmouth is the opening to the Soviet torture chamber. So you all know what's going on in Afghanistan. We've entered or started yet another chapter of horror and nightmare in Afghanistan. And this whole thing is, for those of us who've left over the years, it's really painful to watch this happen. And when we left in 1980, there was absolutely no news coming out of the country. We were desperate for it, but didn't have it. And today we have, we're bombarded with the imagery that's coming out of the country. And I'm glad that the eyes of the world are on it. But I think also we tend to become desensitized and forget. And the book is also a love letter to the war dead. So I am going to dedicate tonight's reading to the war dead of Afghanistan. I'm going to begin with the letter D. D, the dead. And there are many that will file through this book. They are loved ones, family, friends, and some are strangers. They are comfortable here, perhaps not uninvited. I was born into a culture whose first law is hospitality. I've observed this trait in members of my family, near and distant. We all open the door, set out the tea, live with the dead. My father's family was modestly sized next to my mother's burgeoning clan of city dwellers. The suffering on both sides was tremendous, but in my father's small family of farmers, the losses seem remarkable. His family was cleaved and then cleaved again to an excessive degree and in brutal ways by the war. My aunt, my father's only sister, had 5 children and lost all 5 in one or another manner. My father lost all 3 of his brothers. It is strange, whether chance or fate, that his own life was not taken. In the beginning, when the forces first arrived, disappearances were common. My father would have been labeled as extremely dangerous to the new and occupying government. He worked, after all, for the embassy of their foremost enemy. And his friends, his co-workers, those he was acquainted with and those he cherished, were picked up one by one, imprisoned, tortured, murdered. The week after we left the country, my father's name was read off a list of enemy sympathizers. He was one of many who needed to be brought in and silenced. If they knew my father, they would have known he is silent by nature and would not harm the smallest of creatures. They would know that he thinks of family and land, but little of politics. When they came to silence him, we were already gone. They missed us, but just. We did not leave intact. The knowledge of death, the wisdom you gain from the understanding that a beloved uncle is tortured, then buried alive, a cousin decapitated, that women are raped, have their fingernails pulled out, their breasts cut off. This wisdom you carry with you across borders and over the years of your life. This wisdom circles the nuclei within your cells and ensures you metabolize all suffering, great and small. And this wisdom reshapes the young in ways unknowable to those fully grown. This knowledge remakes the children into something else. Yes, it was strange to arrive in a peaceful land, to share a classroom and a schoolyard with children who still had their innocence and peered out through a single pair of eyes. For our lids opened and closed as theirs did, but revealed intermittently different sets of eyes. We could stand at once in a desolate cityscape surrounded by tanks and headstones and on a school playground filled with a din of laughter and bouncing balls, skipping children. I remember seeing my sisters across that schoolyard and seeing them apart, unnatural among the other children. And when in passing we were close enough to catch each other's eyes, the cognition was both sweet and painful. We'd come from a place no one knew existed, from a reality we could not explain to anyone, and we had seen and known things we dared not utter to those around us. They reshape and redefine you, the dead. They cast their pall over you, draw the pink from your cheek or color it in your lips a too deep crimson, and they hold your hand while you skip, climb, and jump rope. They are loved ones, and there are others I don't recognize. The man who carries a book half torn, he comes and goes silently, but I do not know who he is, what it is he wishes to communicate, if anything. He isn't in a hurry and seems to be content to be dispossessed, unbound to land or time. He simply comes and goes over the days of my life, as do the other war dead, carrying the half of a book he never opens, but which seems an extension of himself, in the hand that clutches it, as if it is his blood that circulates up and down the spine of the book, and his thoughts that make its pages flutter. The dead are many and pass through and reside in books comfortably. Perhaps it is in books they find solace and home. They move through this one, and some may stop a moment to gaze up at you. Do not avert your eyes. So these pieces are, the following pieces are all about the real war dead. Some are family, some friends, and some strangers. Old woman. The old woman walks to the market. She is following the prescriptions. She is covered head to toe. When she speaks softly, briefly. She walks with someone of the male gender, her small grandson. He carries her empty shopping bags for her over his shoulder. He kicks the stones that come before his feet. She keeps hold of his small hand, tries to steady the speed and steady her gait beneath the enveloping garment. Her tattered shoes peep out from underneath its hem as she walks. At the intersection of two narrow streets, she meets with the roving men of God who see her white shoes and are alarmed by her impudence, by her flagrant disregard for their rules and the desecration of their flag. They grab the small boy from behind her and push the old woman to the ground. They pull off her shoes and beat her with them. They whack and kick her ankles, her shins, her back, and her arms. She is a small heap beneath the garment. They lift it and see she is an old woman. Granny, you should know better. The oldest of the men steps over her unmoving form. The two younger kick her again in her ribs, her spine. Take the old mother home, they yell. Teach her modesty. The beaten woman lies in the street as the men move on to continue their rounds, and others cautiously pass and regard her from a distance. A young woman walking alongside her brother. A young woman walking alongside her brother leaves him to run over and draw the voluminous garment over the woman's legs and feet to cover her, then catches up with her brother again. Unmoving, the old woman lies there until her grandson returns with a neighbor who lifts her, sets her down in his cart, and tows her home. Celerity. So our earth reels, so our galaxy hurtles through the vast deep. So. Suit. He is young. He wears a suit, is proud to do so. He walks the village roads proudly to the main street where he is employed at the repair shop to fix radios, clocks, and watches. He is a farmer's son, but keeps his forearms level, his elbows against his ribs and his shoulders drawn back and down, even when he is bent over his work. His wrists are agile and steady. His fingers are adept at turning screws, uncoiling springs, connecting wires, and adjusting gears, tubes, circuits, wheels, and weights. His eyes are sharp and made sharper by the loop he keeps in his pocket. His ears pick up sounds faint and sounds amiss in the broken instruments before him. He understands gravity and temperature and works his materials accordingly to achieve precision. He loves accuracy and dresses smartly. But what is fashionable in the city is not appropriate in the village. Moreover, in wartime, propriety resides more with power than with custom. The men who have appeared recently to oversee village affairs tells him it is indecent to wear a suit, to emulate the ways of the godless enemy who occupy the cities and infect the people. The dress suit he wears is not new, was purchased from a friend in a neighboring town and fits tightly across his shoulders. His neckties were cut and sewn by his mother, who used the spare scraps of fabric to finish a quilt for her granddaughter. And the village leaders, the new men of God who have recently appeared, warn him a second time about his dress. But he is young and cheerful and proudly walks the same village roads to and from work that they sternly walk to keep order and keep an eye on the prideful. Coming home in the evening, the repairman is stopped by two men and knocked to the ground onto his hands and knees to be made an example of. The first man turns and cinches the fallen man's tie around his neck and uses it and his own knee braced between the repairman's shoulder blades to keep his clean-shaven head steady. The one wielding the sword lifts his arms high above his head and relies on the strength and heft of those arms to bring the blade down swiftly, to cut the young man's head off cleanly with a single blow. They know where he lives and know his family. They drag his body over the dusty earth and drop it in the middle of the road in front of his house. They toss his head over the wall into the courtyard where his mother, rising early, will feed the chickens and bake the morning bread. Loss. And mother says, it is not that they have passed, but that their simple, innocent lives were taken senselessly. The legacy they leave is one of futility, of nothing where there should have been something, of a small void where a modest life might have been lived fully, a small void left by an insensate war that suctioned each life up as a vacuum suctions up dust. If you hold up to the sky the fabric that was once our land, mother says, you will see these apertures, and you will know that our dead dot our land as the stars dot the sky, endlessly, mutely. Before, so. And father, squatting, swaying, harvesting leek and basil in the garden at dusk for mother's dinner, says, before the war, life was simple. The earth was giving, it was bountiful. The farm produced beets and melons, corn and cotton. We carried the beets in 2 hands. They were as large as our heads. Watermelons ballooned before our eyes until the earth cratered under their weight, until they split. Before the curse, life was sweet. It was simple. Before the curse, life was simple and blessed. The sky was blessed. It poured rain. The earth was blessed. It produced bounties. Our lives were blessed, simple, before the war. The immigrants. In war, in one place, is like a wound in all. What are walls and borders, disparate tongues and dress to the free flow of blood? When the throat releases the singular wail in each place wasted by the scourge, do not all ears everywhere perk up? Do not all bodies shiver at once? Subtraction. When they brought her first one home, her knees buckled and she collapsed onto the floor before anyone could catch her. She didn't try to regain the breath that had been clapped out of her and somewhere far back and deep within her. She worked to will it away, as she worked to will away the image she'd glimpsed of her boy carried in through the door in his uncle's arms. But her breath returned of its own accord, and then the wailing began. The following year, her eldest was driven home by strangers, fellow soldiers of her son, who'd taken care to cleanse his wounds and wrap his body, though they knew it was not their place, and his family would see to the ritual and see what was left of him when they did. She heard the army vehicle's motor, listened for the truck to slow as it advanced up her street, and, hearing the squeal of brakes and the grinding of gravel, began to sway and reach out with her hand for the nearest wall to brace herself, while her other hand went to her scalp to grab her hair at its roots. A scream gathered itself within her belly, thrashed within her rib cage, rattled up her throat, and released before the front gate was opened. It silenced the entire neighborhood. In the fall of the same year, her third boy came home. His body was followed in by a procession of neighbors with bowed, nodding heads, who were now adept at the routine. and were prepared to take over her household duties. This time, the void that opened before her allowed her entrance. It closed about her for several days, let her sleep the sleep of oblivion, and released her changed to a changed world. She missed this third funeral, and her family and neighbors were not sorry for it. The dimmed world she returned to operated by rote, like a mindless machine. The dull sun rose and the dull sun set. The moon ballooned and dissolved and looked in her window 6 nights a month. The new world was occupied by people, some familiar, who spoke words that blistered and popped like water in a kettle and evaporated before she could grab hold of their structure or arrangement. Her neighbors and her cousins, her brother and her own aged mother were the gears and cogs that operated the breathless mechanical world. In bed, she was shifted and turned over, dressed and undressed again, fed and wiped clean. In the bath, her arms were lifted and set down, her legs stretched out, kneaded and folded again, her upper and underside scrubbed and rinsed, her hair shampooed and combed, her nails clipped. And in time, she too was a gear, and her turnings produced steaming meals and neat piles of laundry and spotless windows. When they brought news of her fourth and last son, a young man forcibly conscripted, whose body the military was still negotiating to have released, she dropped the needle and the handkerchief from her hands. She stood up and stumbled out into the courtyard, into the daylight, tore open her shirt, pulled down her bra, and near the feet of the neighbors duly arrived, she threw herself to the ground and grated her breasts across the dry, pebbly dirt, crying, "I'm burning, I'm burning." She ground her flesh into the earth and cried, "I'm on fire, let me in." But the earth did not distinguish the inferno in her chest, and the earth did not open up to take her in, though it sopped up her blood and her milk. Riveted. And what have they not been witness to? The sun, the stars, the moon, the planets, pinned to our firmaments like many captive eyes, blinking and unblinking. And as a final dedication to the war dead, this next piece, Micheline and I have talked about books as cenotaphs, as monuments to the dead, especially to the dead who have no burial place of their own. I very much think of this book as one, but I have hope that there's also another burial ground for them. Above. Dear reader, come, look. Place your eye here, just here over the lens. Look at the cloud, that dense, shifting mantle in the sky. Keep watching. Do you see it spiral? Look again. It begins to evaporate. And the radiance at its center, a star at inception. In the beginning, a star. Thank you.
Thank you.
That was magnificent. It was a beautiful reading. It's an extraordinary book. I think it's one of the great books. And I think it's a book that is not only tremendously important at this time for so many reasons. I mean, we're all having to deal with the possible loss of everything. And we're all feeling terribly displaced and unsure and frightened, but also hopeful. But I think it's a book that is essential for our time, but also is going to persevere. And when I finished it, I thought it was a great book and a lasting book. And I thought of 100 Days of Solitude and the enormous impact that book had when it came out. And of course, it was the time of the boom. All these books were suddenly being translated. And I wish your book had had that particular moment with all these companions that would be appearing simultaneously. but it hasn't. But it's making its way. It's touching so many people, and is going to persist because it's so deeply loved by those who discover it. And I've had friends who have fallen in love with it, as I did, and read it again and again. And I know that's happening now, and I'm so glad.
Thank you, Rikki.
I was going to try to speak of the essential things that happen within the book, and it's so difficult to speak of this quickly, but I took some notes to make it easier. But you're writing about the light, darkness and light. And the light is the light of loving and the light of seeing and of becoming. And again, starlight returns to illuminate the book. And so, for example, and here are the sister's eyes, not like nebula churning the cosmic soil. Not unlike nebula churning the cosmic soil, pushing the stars, consuming and reflecting light. Then we move from illumination and a joyous and fearless seeing to blindness, to looking away. A young policeman, disturbed by the strong lights of a truck that is carrying prisoners who will be buried alive, quote, lowers his cap to cover his eyes. So the light is also about seeing, having the courage, as you do, and fearlessness to see within ourselves, to see what is actually happening around us. So the young man, the young policeman is not alone. There are many others, there are engineers, military men, senior officers. So in fact, this darkness is complicity, and it's all around us, and it's in many forms. And then you go on, the truck's lights are strong and thick with the earth's rising dust. And this rising dust is the dust of war. And the dust of war comes in again and again to darken the book. But then you return to the sky above, thick with a band of stars. But the working men do not see this band of stars. I was going to ask you to read Before So, but you did, which is wonderful, returning to the garden, which is a thing that you do again and again. And I'm wondering, I've been so curious about the way that you have managed to navigate this darkness and the way you return again and again to the beauties of the world. And it's so clear in the book that having had this extraordinarily loving, inventive, delightful family has allowed for an enormous resilience and muscle and fearlessness. Is that so?
Yeah, I still, I'm still amazed by what my parents were able to do, especially as I've gotten older. I'm not a parent, but I have nieces and a nephew, and my sisters and I, we wonder, how did they do it? I mean, you have to, you don't have a choice, especially I think when you're trying to protect your children and take them out of a space like that. But still, the courage and fortitude that they had to do all of it, to leave the country, to come to a part of the world they knew nothing about, to start again and again and again, and always have hope that they might return one day, to watch this war unfold and roll on year after year from a distance. My dad's still suffering. He can't take his eyes off what's going on. He watches what's on the news here, but also he watches an Afghani channel on Al Jazeera, and so he sees a lot of what I don't, partly because it's just too much for me to take it all on, but also because it's in a Farsi that is at a level I don't understand. So he watches news, but he'll tell me about it every time I call him. So that kind of strength that you need to carry this for a lifetime. I know experience it myself. It's something that you have to face constantly as the war keeps just churning and taking on one or another face. But for my dad, who lives half his life there, you know, who spent his entire childhood there, who grew up on this farm that he so loved, and then went to Kabul, a city beloved, and very much because he met my mother there. They were married there. We all were born there. So to see all this, you know, happening, it's a strange burden, I think, for anybody to take on. Coming here as children, there's something, it's a blessing and a curse. I mean, as I read, it really does something awful, I think, to the child who takes these things in and is aware of the most horrendous things from a very young age. It really shapes you, but you're also still a child, and you are in love with the world and the stars and the plants and the bugs, and I think I set it down as I did in the book because it's always been my life, carrying the two opposites, the you know, the darkness, the dust, and the starlight.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello.
Hi.
I have so many, I don't really have any questions. I just, the reading was, as always, so beautiful to hear the words. And I guess I want to talk with you about books. And there is a lot of sorrow in this book, obviously, and in life and suffering. I guess who said it? Was it in the Odyssey that the gods gave us suffering so we would have something to sing about? And this book is a song. I mean, it's at times the dirge. It says it is, but it's such an extraordinary book. Like Rikki said, I think it's one of the great books in my lifetime that I have come across as a contemporary. And there's the courage of surviving a war is something. I don't know what that is. And I mean, we even talk about it is so moving, but the courage to write this book. And to be an artist. I mean, it's still just, every time I read the book, I am so moved by it. And not just its sorrow and the dead who are there, but its beauty. Its capacity to seek in the darkness, as you said, Rikki, the patterns, the spiral, the beauty that we look, that you have this capacity to see it is, I'm amazed. And if a masterful book is the thing that makes the hair stand up on the back of your neck, it does, you know, and it's the kind of book, and this isn't a question, I don't know what you'll say, but that, you know, that seeks the things that we cannot say and put into language. This book so much also does that, through everything about it. Its arrangement, its sequence, the art, the way the alphabet is understood, that as you read, you know you are reading, and reading itself as a sacred place, which our culture is losing its great sense of. And so the books that still preserve reading as sacred is, I mean, I don't know. Is there anything, what else is there to say? Sorry to get so emotional. It's hard for me. Every time I have you like come and read from this book, then I start crying but not just from my sorrow, but from the beauty.
Thank you so much, Micheline. I mean, you've always gotten it, the book as it was being written over that whole decade, and really, like, often I think if it wasn't for you, I may have turned away from some aspects of it at least. But just sharing this love for literature, for books as a form, as a sacred form, as a vital form, as a transcendent form through space and time. it's something that you and I share, and Rikki and I share, and Rick, I know, does as well. The work that he does is incredible, putting books into the hands of readers. Yeah, and it's a service too, as well, right? I mean, it's not easy work. It's not easy to go to some of these places, especially alone, because writing is such a solitary endeavor. But I think what draws you through, or what drives you through the whole process, especially something that takes this long, is a love for books and a belief in their power. You know, that they can do these things. I only know it as a reader. I mean, that's where I know it first, is as a reader coming to this country and being given a library card by a friend's mother, or another immigrant from Czechoslovakia at the time. Yeah, she gave me a library card on my 8th birthday, and it was the best gift I've ever received. And I spent endless hours at that library and read everything I could, and was drawn to the books. Draw you, you know which shelves to go to, even as a non-native speaker. Learning to read through them, learning, just finding myself through them, finding others through them, going on endless adventures and falling in love. I mean, they're such powerful things, and they survive, I think, for a reason. But yeah, I think our love for books allows us to do this, right? It's not easy work. Not that it isn't joyous and beautiful work. It is all of that too. There's nothing more wonderful for me than getting lost in the process of writing. But there were plenty of days where I didn't want to come sit down in front of the screen and write some of these pieces. It was a really difficult thing to do, and I waited years. It wasn't until the end that I could face some of these pieces. But the dead have always been there with me. I've been carrying them around, and really, that idea of the book is a cenotaph, a place to let the dead rest. I was able to do that. Like, I could pull them out of myself and stop carrying that pain. You know, these are all people that we knew, who died in really horrific ways, and you want people to just live out these simple lives. That's all we ask for. But something like war just comes through and wipes out entire populations. So seeing it happen again is recently is really, really difficult. I'm so happy for those who were able to escape, but people I really feel for are those left behind.
You bring them so close to us, but also your sisters. And I wondered about how you managed, how that happened, that you were writing about your sisters and you give them each so much room, so much space to be themselves. But I also had the impression that you gave yourself permission to do so much dreaming for them, and creating these kinds of realms for each one of them.
Mm-hmm.
I wondered if that was intentional, or if that just happened with the writing, that you felt that you could do that, or that it just pounced, and happened.
When I first started writing it, I thought I would write each of them as they are. So there are a few pieces in the book, all the sleep pieces, the somnambulist and the sleepwalker, and those are my sisters as they were when we were growing up. But otherwise, it started to pull away from that at some point. I'm not sure why. And I just wrote myself. There's a piece in the book about how the sisters all collapse, and there's only one sister. There's only one narrator. And yet they're reflected in me again and again, because growing up amongst 4 sisters in close quarters, you really you become like a single entity in some ways. The way you move about each other, speak to each other, the love, the burdens, the aid you give each other, over small and large things, the fighting, the making up, the tenderness, the joy, the beauty, that's all there. But I gave myself permission at some point to just write about myself as a child, my love for birds and and the stars and the insects and the ocean. Yeah, I think books and their writers do that naturally, right? I think we're always, when we're writing about ourselves ultimately. It's what we know internally, and putting that on the page, whatever name you give the characters, and it's partly why the characters are unnamed, is that in the end, they're all a single character. And yet I pulled myself out of it too, because this isn't about me. It's about being a human being on this planet, falling in love with the myriad things that are here for us to fall in love with: people, cultures, the sky, flowers and bees. And I think that's ultimately it. I just wanted to give my very human perspective.
I have a question. I lived in Algeria for 2 years. And so I was witness to families where women were very rarely out of the house and could never go out alone. And for a time it was an odd situation, but I was put up with my French husband, who was there doing a kind of French Peace Corps in a hotel, because they had no other place to put us. It's an old colonial hotel, and the apartment next to us, every morning I would hear the husband leave and lock the door, and then in the evening come back and open the door. And I knew she was there all day. And I could not help but wonder, and thinking about the Taliban, I mean, thinking about this violence and misogyny, lethal misogyny, misogyny which takes so many forms. But I always wondered there, and I wonder if this isn't something coming into play, which is, it's very complex, of course, but when you have young women, girls who are suddenly pulled out of school, and I saw that in Algeria after the coup d'etat, when the really hard right came back, and married to often very old men they'd never met. There were a number of suicides when I was there, but of course many of them did not commit suicide. And I wondered about how can you possibly bring up healthy children when you're in a situation like that? How can you not be deeply distressed? And how can that not affect the happiness and the sanity of your own children? And so, I mean, if that is so, it's a kind of impossible situation where a culture is creating this lethal and absolutely impossible anomaly within itself again and again and again. Does that make any sense?
Yeah. And are you comparing it to what the Taliban are forcing
Yeah,
women
exactly.
to suffer in Afghanistan? Yeah, I mean, it's just barbaric. And I think if you ask just about any Afghan mother in the country, or across the world in the diaspora now, they would agree that it's completely barbaric. Nobody wants that for their children. And these men, I don't know what it is. It's, they're not from Kabul, they're not from the cities. A lot of them are from Pakistan. It's where they were trained, educated, if you can use that word. Unfortunately, our own government here in the US has something to do with that, printing books at the University of Nebraska in the 80s to teach exactly this sort of thing to young children, young Afghan immigrants in Pakistan at the madrasas. Those books are still out there. A sort of Islamic fundamentalism that did not exist in Afghanistan when I was a child. It was brought over by the Taliban, and through fear, violence, what they inflict on the population as a whole, but especially on women, they're able to enforce this sort of really distorted version of Islam that is not how Afghans, experience religion. Religion was always a very different thing. It was very cultural. Everybody practiced it, but the country in the 60s and 70s was really opened up. So, you know, my mother wore mini skirts and had her hair beehived, as did her sisters. So, you know, it's not, and when the Soviets came, there's a lot of, you know, killings and a lot of violence at the first few years, but then they allowed things to, I'd say, open up even more for young women. I have a cousin who studied medicine and is now a doctor, was actually running the cancer ward in Kabul when I went to visit in 2015. She studied while the Soviets were there. So this particular way of treating women and using Islam to do it is particular to the Taliban, who are a mix of Pakistani and Afghani men who I'm not sure. I don't know how to explain them, because it really is just so crazy what they expect and what they're doing.
Did they invent the burqa? Because that didn't exist before, right?
No, that there were some women, I remember as a little girl, who wore the burqa in Afghanistan, but it was very rare.
Mhm.
You know, you questioned it if you saw it in the streets. But now, when I went in 2015, that's the only time I've returned. Yeah, women were covered from head to toe, not necessarily in burqas. I think things were starting to open up a bit, but your head, you know, down to your wrists and ankles, everything had to be covered still. And this was in the city. But even at that time, the Taliban were taking over the country. They'd come into my dad's village north of Kabul, taken that. We were planning to visit, but we couldn't because the Taliban had taken that. They'd taken Mazar-e Sharif in the north, the airport there. So yeah, I mean, this almost happened. What happened recently almost happened in 2015, but the American forces were there and were able to push back. And this time leaving it, you know, I think it was very foreseeable that it would happen quickly across the country.
Mhm. Mm. It's such a stunning, fearless, sane, loving, muscled look into all that is wrong with our entire world. I mean, in a way, it's here it is, you know, you're giving us this very lucid look, and you're giving us also this marvelous, beautiful, and it makes me weep too, you know, glimpse of all the possibilities. And the night sky and the Milky Way, which is harder and harder to see, thanks to industries. Also such a marvelous way of imagining an infinitely luminous life, an infinitely luminous world with infinite possibilities to live in good ways and productive ways and loving ways. And that is one of the reasons why I think the book functions so beautifully, is that we do have again and again the glimpse into the light, into the dark. And that choice is our choice. It's everyone's choice. It's our species' choice. No.
Yeah.
So marvelous.
Thank you, Rikki.
Are there things you'd like to tell us about the book?
That's a good question. And then maybe we can take some questions. I know I have this question about, I mean, I know I saw the book a long time ago in its earliest maybe iterations, but did you end up writing the book you thought you'd write? Or when you thought you were writing a book and then you have this book now, we have this book. That's, you know, is there anything about that?
I think what finally came out was what I knew needed to be written. But there were, I think, 4 or 5 times when I thought I was finished with a book, and it wouldn't let me alone. Pieces kept kind of writing themselves either during the night or through dreams, or like awake or dreaming, or I'd sit down and edit something that I'd written a couple of days before, and a new piece would butt off of that one. So I guess yes and no. This is the book that I needed to release to get out of myself. And it's also a very different book from the one I consciously set out to write. Yeah.
And that's true. I mean, so now we're opening up to questions if anyone has questions and wants to write them in the chat. But I don't know, Fuzzy, is there anything in terms of like Rikki's question that when you think about your book and the world and this that you thought about and want to talk about that feels pertinent?
Yeah, I mean, obviously what's happening now in the country, but like Rikki said, this is things very similar to it are happening throughout our world. We're on the brink in so many ways. And I feel like there are ways in which we can pull back from that brink just through kind of turning around and looking at what we have, who we are. The potential, I think, is enormous. Like, we're such an amazing and beautiful species. What we dream up, what we create technologically, medicinally, of course, in terms of all the arts, all the diversity and the cultures on this planet through time. These are all the things that I've always been in love with, that there's so much to love in our world that our species has created. I think part of the problem right now too is that we push ourselves to that dark brink, that we see only the darkness and the negativity and the things that we've done, as if everything else means nothing. I don't know what it is. It's almost an addiction to the darkness. I feel like the doom scrolling, the focus on all the wrongs that individuals or societies do. Like, these are important things that it needs to happen. But I think we also need to pull back and just be in wonderment, like there's so much to be joyous over, to have love for, I think wonder is something that is unfortunately missing in this moment in time. And I think something as simple as that could be medicine for so many things that we're going through. And again, back to books. I think books offer that. Art does, music, dance, nature, of course, our gardens. Yeah, there's so much to love on this little planet that's just, whizzing around this solar system, around this galaxy. It's a really special place, and I think we forget that.
Yeah, not least of which also the human imagination, which we haven't talked about, but of course we're speaking of imaginative literature and the wonder of it, even that it can consider such sad and violent things, but in your book, that's also life is here. I mean, you're a biologist as well, and that's here, the love of life and wonder. And I often think now, especially where we put our focus, and reading creates a focus of a very important kind, I think, but telephone scrolling, yeah, it's just, we get into fear and anxiety, and I don't think from there we're gonna get anywhere good. All right, let's see, we have some questions. So at what point in your process did the alphabet become the structure, and what brought you to that decision?
I really believe in working on two levels, the conscious and the unconscious level. I dream a lot, and I feel like a lot of the work happens on that level. It's not done in the same way that work consciously is done, but but I'd gotten to a certain point about 5 years in. So this book took about 10 years total. About 5 years in, I knew I had more to do, a lot more, but something had stopped me so that I wasn't able to work as I wanted to. So I gave myself permission to just let it lie, to put it away for, I said 6 to 8 months, and kind of right on the dot around that time, I woke up from a dream about really short dream, just something running through my head about a book needs to be written, an alphabet book needs to be written. And as I became more conscious, I thought, that's a really great idea for an adult book. You know, we all read alphabet books as children. There's this sort of magic to them, this sort of hand holding that happens as you go from one to the next letter. It opens up the world as you travel through the alphabet. And then I thought, wait a minute, this is exactly what I need to do for this book. This is the structure that it's been waiting for. So I got up in the middle of the night and just jotted down every letter of the alphabet and what each piece would be about. And most of them pretty much stayed like that. It was as if I'd been working those 6, 8 months, and it was all there. It just came out. Yeah.
Oh, amazing. It's amazing how the mind makes patterns, whatever the
Yeah.
mind, and that books have a pattern that is not perceptible even to the artist sometimes for a long time, but then emerges.
Yeah. I think the imagination is such an incredible space, and we can enter it consciously or unconsciously, but it's like the universe. It's a vast and always evolving, always birthing space.
Yeah, I know. Rikki, in your essay, I think it's the Deep Sea, where you talk about how, I always say this to my own students, how we have to get into the unknown, get off the path of the so-called known and move in, and that's where things happen. I think that is so true.
Yeah.
Let's see here. Wonderful reading. Thank you, Fowzia. Being bilingual, do you see any places in your writing in English that are influenced by your mother tongue? Rhythms, tones, worldview?
Yeah, I've thought about that. I think in places it definitely happens. For example, if I'm writing for my dad or for my mom, and these aren't things that they've said, but yeah, a different rhythm comes in, and I think it's the rhythm from Farsi, from the language we spoke at home.
And maybe there's one more. Let's see. There are characters in the book that are not human, not only the sky and the Milky Way, but the grandfather tree. Where is the tree coming from? It's a beautiful presence.
It is an actual tree, or a series of trees. As we moved from house to house when I was growing up, it seemed like there was always a large tree in the same place, in the same position in the backyard of each house. At the first one, this was when we first moved to the United States, my dad built us a swing from that tree. And there's a certain sort of intimate relationship you build with a tree from which a swing hangs and from which you hang, because you learn its rhythms, you learn to speak with it. And then in another house, 2 other houses actually, he built us tree houses. So we spent endless hours there, as you know, my sisters and I, or each of us alone. You went there for all sorts of things, to read, to cry, to get away from things inside the house, or just to be in the presence of the tree itself. And they show up in dreams. Birds, again, are characters in the book. They come to these trees and they speak from the trees. There's just something about it, the canopy of a tree, this magical space, and maybe it represents the mind, the imagination for me. I'm not sure, but yeah, it's a presence for sure.
I think, well, there's in the book, in life, the way that children know things, the wonder is there for children. That's in the, and that trees are ancient beings. I think we just feel that as a child. You spend time in trees, and they move on a different time than primates, but they're just, and that's here too, the presence. I think that's what that question was getting to, the trees as presences. I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Well, okay, we have a question from Christian Fagerland. I know. Each of your thoughts on wonder, imagination in your own processes as inspiration for what you create. I mean, I think this is in part about inspiration. Do you have a sense of your own process and how, where moments come from, or in general, when you're working now, you must be working on some things?
I think from different sources, again, from dreams and the unconscious, whether you're sleeping or daydreaming, from nature, again, from books, you can spark something. But it's also very visual for me, just watching things, looking at things, the forms of things in spaces, whether interior or outside. Yeah, can just spark something. It's often that, it's just a spark, a momentary connection. And I think of the eye as a very devotional apparatus. I look at things with devotion. I'm not religious, but I think of devotion as this almost lovemaking with the things in this world. I don't mean that in a romantic way, although of course that's there too, but just, yeah, feeling a deep love for things and using the eye to follow that love, to look at the things in our space, whether that's watching somebody suffering, watching children playing, or looking at a tree and its leaves a certain time of year, or the way the light comes through a window. It's a very devotional act, this watching, this sensory action that's there, available all the time.
That's such an amazing line. The eye is a devotional apparatus, and I think captures one of the amazing things about you, and there are many as an artist, but what we take for granted is where there is so much wonder. The eye itself, when it comes into the fossil record, the way it allows light waves to be processed by the brain and to see and have color. I mean, but that's so beautiful. Thank you so much.
Oh, thanks, Micheline. I would love to hear. The question was for all of us, I think, from both you and Rikki about that.
No, it was for you.
It said the three of you.
Rick, do you have any questions?
I did have the one about the tree. That was me. Because I felt that. And not to overly do, I could say this, that among the three of us, and probably we haven't been in the same, all four of us in the same email thread with this kind of thing, but over the years we've shared a lot about books. And one of the, and I don't think when I first read Fowzia's book, I knew that Farsi was the language, although in her last name I had a sense. But I don't know if you've read Sharnoose Parsapour's Tuba and the Meaning of Night, which is Tuba, T-O-U-B-A, it's a tree. And Shireen Nishat has an art film, a little, it's like about a 10-minute, one of those it's an art piece. It's actually in the Seattle Asian Art Museum as an art piece, but it's about a 10-minute film that Shireen Nishat made of this tree. And it's drawn from Parsapour's work. Sharnoose Parsapour lives in the Bay Area, I believe, and is an exiled Iranian writer who is probably more known for the book called Women Without Men, which was made into a film by Shireen Nishat. So anyway, I'm sort of moving this away from what we've just been through, but at the same time, that's the way we all are as humans, where we have this intense talk and what we hold about beauty and horror and sadness, but we also are going to buy groceries later on or whatever we're doing. But also we do talk about books and the book and what has been said about books and the sacredness of reading and what we do with our eyes and where they are, and reading trees, reading landscape and reading flowers in the sky are all part of, we all, I think, come to those in different ways, or we can, and when we're feeling most fully in life. So
I just want to say one last thing before we get off, which is please buy the book. Because I have heard from booksellers that then there are these events, and then, you know, buying the book from Elliott Bay, and you guys are incredible, and thank God for you as this extraordinary bookstore in the United States, and to Karen, what good work you do to
Yeah.
keep.
Well, and just to
and
say,
Will,
you know, I've told a lot of people about this book in the time it's been out, but it's also had other people. Literally today, I helped a woman who was in the store and buying all sorts of other really amazing books, and even said her first name was an Arab version of Fowzia, but she pointed to the book saying on display and says, somebody gave me this book. And that sense that the book is being given that way. Another friend who couldn't be here, but was because she's going somewhere and giving a reading herself, she teaches a reading group of these like older, you know, university club women, and she's giving them an intense group of books, and this is one of them though. And she said she got an amazing response. So like a group that didn't know what they're getting when they signed up for that thing, like here's gonna be some books to read, and this was one of them. So it's, you know, we live in this world, and part of how we live is sharing stories and sharing what we see. And I said this the other night after the end of a reading, and I mentioned a little bit to Micheline and Rikki and Fowzia before, of two writers out of Vietnam, and one way and the other, and a book in question, actually in fiction but also not in fiction, dealt with My Lai, and there was you know, horrible things in that book, and the question too about where you choose to be given all this. And it was a choice of beauty and seeking it, holding it, and all of that, which has been said here tonight too. So these are lessons to take to heart and keep living and passing along to others, those who we talk to and those who follow us in time. And that's more than I should say in this context. But to say to those who have joined us, because I think we're at that point, and I will say the other hard part is that ideally we would have been in the same room with this, and hopefully we can do that someday, because this is not an easy one to all of us are gonna have to figure out how to walk away from tonight, or go away from tonight, and because it's very intense what we've heard. And those of you who've read this, you have been revisiting what you've read, and you know, take care, because it's extraordinary, beautiful work. And you know, it's at the same time, you want the humanness of being around others who are also experiencing it is a precious and beautiful thing. So thank you everyone who's with us, and thank you Micheline and Rikki for what you've done tonight. I mean, I know we'll all keep some of this conversation going, and Fowzia, especially you, what you've written, what you've done tonight, you know, and we look forward to whatever else is done in the future, because you know, we've all said and feel about what this book is, and whatever is next in art, in writing, in any of it, we wish you well, and we wish well for others who are not with us tonight for all sorts of other reasons, but are definitely struggling with what to try and survive what is going on. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Rick, Elliott Bay, Karen, Rikki, Micheline. It's been so wonderful being with you all tonight. Really, just thank you.
let's do it in person next time.
Yes. Yes.
This out.
Yes.